Yeah.
Wow, 60. C'est pas possible.
Les gens préfèrent le Zoom.
Non, mais pas aussi des gens qui viennent d'ailleurs. J'ai vu des gens du Portugal qui viennent de.
Well, good morning, everybody. Let's see. So I think we can start probably with the seminar. I remind you, we are at the building 23, room 01, and so you can still join us here, or you have the time, or still online. We are very happy to have Marion Valeix. So, so we will start the seminar. Anna, if you wanted to please to make the introduction.
Thank you. So it's my great pleasure to introduce today to you Marion Valeix. She has defended a thesis on the role of elephants on the structure of African savannas at the University of Paris, supervised by Hervé Fritz. She then did postdoctoral work, including with Wild Crew, the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit in Oxford. She's still associated with Wild Crew, and she'll work in direct contact with them. In 2012, she obtained a permanent position with the CNRS at the Laboratory on Biometry and Evolutionary Biology, LBBE, in Lyon. And I'm twice as happy to welcome Marion today here, because it's also welcoming to Montpellier. In fact, Marion is now in the process of transferring to Montpellier. She will be, for the next year, she's hosted as a guest at the CEF, the Center for Evolutionary Functional Ecology here in Montpellier, and with the idea that she would eventually, hopefully, become part of the community. So I hope you can join me in welcoming her physically as well as today. So you will hear about Marion's work by herself, but there's a short overview. She defines herself as a wildlife biologist. Her work focuses on the behavioral ecology of predator-prey interactions amongst large mammals, more specifically the processes determining the dynamics of these interactions in space and time. Her work is focused mainly in African savannas, and particularly, as I'm sure you will hear, in Hwange National Park in Zimbabwe. Marion, over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Anna. So I can start sharing my screen. Do you see it? It's okay for people who are online? Yes?
They will say if there's a problem. They will say on the chat.
Okay. I just don't manage to put it as a plain screen. But do you see it as plain screen? No.
Yeah.
Share the screen, okay. Laurent said that.
C'est pas en plein écran, juste. Ce n'est pas en plein écran, c'est juste.
Ah. Mais vous le voyez en plein écran?
Il passe un peu en plein screen.
Non.
Arrête le partage et reprends.
Il faut juste se reconnecter.
Arrête le partage.
Voilà, c'est bon.
Ça, c'est toi. C'est toi qui viens d'ouvrir deux, peut-être.
Now we see.
They don't see the same. Ok, ouvre-le. Aussi, on a deux. Du coup, ici, dans ton partage juste. Ici, partage juste.
Sinon, attends. Je vais le PDF. Du coup, on va arriver ici.
Voilà.
Now close the one, the thing on the right.
C'est bon,
No,
c'est
no,
bon,
no,
c'est bon,
it's
c'est bon.
good. It's good.
It's okay. Yes. Okay. So thank you for your patience. Thank you very much for the ones who are in this room. It's a pleasure to see you, and thank you for all the people online for being here to listen to me today. Thank you for the organizing committee of the SEM, and thank you, Anna, for inviting me. It's a pleasure for me, and this perspective of joining the Montpellier community is a great perspective. So, as Anna introduced me, I'm Marion Valeix, I took the opportunity, I thought as the SEM as an opportunity to give a big overview of the different things I've done in my research since I did and that I'm doing. And I thought of the common thread of my research, and I think this common thread is interspecific interactions and their role in the functioning of communities, and also how the prism of interspecific interactions helps us understand the impact of human activities and global changes. So, if we think about interspecific interactions, and if I ask you to think of interspecific interactions, I think for most people, the most obvious question that comes to mind is who eats who? Who eats who? And so basically, it's all the trophic interactions. Those trophic interactions can be put together, and we can make big food webs, and we understand a lot using all those trophic interactions. With trophic interactions, there's a notion of predation, herbivory, but also interaction chains, when two species can be indirectly linked by a third species, and also exploitation competition. But there's a paper that I like to cite that comes from a research group that has inspired my work a lot, by Sonia Kefi there. Life is more than a meal. And it's important to integrate also non-feeding interactions into our understanding of the world. So what are those non-trophic interactions? They can be negative, and most of the time it will be mechanisms of interference. Interference for lights in the forest, interference for space in general. And here I illustrate that with the example of interference competition for space in the intertidal community of mollusks. But it can also be non-lethal effects of predation. I will come back to that later, so I will not tell much here. But luckily enough, we live in a world where it's not only about negative interaction. There are also positive interaction, facilitation. But those positive interactions, so some people have spent their life working on symbiotic interaction, mycorrhizas, and they know that. But when we look at the global picture of all the work that has been done, they've been most of the time underestimated and understudied. So there's a need to consider a bit more those positive interactions. So coming from the world of large mammals, we think mainly about resource provisioning. For example, when you've got a carnivore killing a large prey, the carcass provides food for scavengers, the scavenger community. It can also be mechanism of facilitation between different herbivore species, with some species that facilitate the use of one patch to a second one. And it can also be cooperation between different species to chase a predator, for example. This is known in birds, as you can see on this picture. So we can see how we've gone from food webs to ecological networks that are more complex. It's not only about trophic interactions. And to complexify one step further, there's also one process that is known as interaction modification. Interaction modification is when you've got two species and a third species is modifying the environment where the interaction between those two other species occur. And this has been mainly documented for species that are known as ecosystem engineers. This is the case of coral reefs in the ocean, beaver dams in the streams, termite mounds in savannas, and earthworms for the soil structure. Those species, by modifying the physical environment, have the potential to modify many things about the other species and their interactions. So we realize now that the study object is quite complex. And on top of that, it's embedded in a changing world. So we are all aware of that we've got important environmental changes driven by habitat destruction, fragmentation, overexploitation, invasive species,
disturbance by people. There are other things, also pollution, light pollution, climate changes. And those environmental changes, they've been studied a lot, the impact on species abundance and species spatial distribution, but also more subtle and more complicated things to study, like species phenology, metabolism, and behavior. And in the past 10, 15 years, there's been an increased awareness that we need to take into account how those environmental changes, by impacting one species, will influence species interactions, or even just the arrow, just the interaction itself. And so there's been many theoretical and experimental work showing the importance to study the variety of interspecific interaction to grab the complexity and the functioning of natural communities and to better understand their responses to changes driven by human activities or global changes. So at my level, this is where my contribution is I've, most of my research is an empirical approach of that, trying to see in large African mammalian communities how those interspecific interactions function and their importance. So before, I used to say when I wanted to say when I was on this slide that, okay, in African savannas, there are very rich communities. But on Tuesday, I went to Paris and I listened to Eric Carcenti, gold medal from the CNRS, and he was telling us about his Tara Ocean expedition and the plankton community. So I will not say it's very rich now, but for big animals, it's still rich. And we can easily picture how all the species in this mammalian community are linked by different types of arrows, different interactions. So I spent in my early career a lot of time studying the vertical interaction. So all what is predator-prey interactions. Describing the diet to understand the lethal effects of predation on their prey, but also the non-lethal effects that I mentioned earlier. So what are those non-lethal effects? It's all what has to do with the behavioral ecology of predator-prey interactions, what is also known as the ecology of fear. So it's a very quick catalog, but it's just that I don't want to spend too much time on that. I've got other things later. But just to show that the sole presence of the we mainly work on the African lion. So the sole presence of the African lion is able to influence strongly the space use and habitat selection by herbivore species, which are their prey, but also induce diel migration. I will come back to that later. The vigilance, level of vigilance in the species, the group size, and then temporal niche. So when I look at that, I was quite happy. It's okay, I've studied a lot of interaction, that's cool. But you realize that most of this interaction is this arrow, focused on the lion and the zebra, a few arrows with other herbivore species. And there are so many things that are unknown. We tend to generalize what we've learned from the interaction between lions and zebras and say, okay, this is the way prey reacts to a predator. But there are several predators, several preys, and a prey might not react depending if it's associated with heterospecific individuals. So there's a lot more than what we've done, and we thought it was already quite cool. So this led me and others to emphasize that we've got, when we are in our study ecosystem, a tendency to simplify what we are studying and sometimes forget the diversity and everything. But still, I will simplify that very strongly to that, because I want to tell you about other things today. In African savannas, there's one key player, which is the African elephant. Of course, it's a big species. It has been, I know there's debate around this term, referred to as a keystone species for several reasons. And we will see how the elephants may influence all the compartments of that community. The African elephant population at the continental, this is the trend at the continental scale, African scale, so it's changing, has changed widely. And we've got a big decline at the continental scale. However, locally, in some areas, you've got, where elephants are very well protected, you've got very high densities. And so there are questions, what does it mean for an ecosystem to lose its elephant population? Or what does it mean if the elephant population is increasing? Because there are major changes in that species. So I will illustrate that in this talk. And so I've been fascinated by African mammal communities. And the question is, are those natural communities influenced by us, by people? And I will take you to a trip there at the end of this red arrow. So this is a picture of the nightlight of Africa. And we think, wow, we are lucky. We are in a pristine environment, pristine ecosystem. However, even in that pristine ecosystem, this is now how this talk will be structured in 3 steps. I want to highlight how management practice by the managers of this ecosystem has strongly modified the whole system, and this will be about pumping of artificial water, pumping of underground water. That's what's happening inside the protected area. But also to show how the community inside the protected area is affected by what's happening outside in the periphery of the protected area. And we will illustrate that with the example of trophy hunting. And finally, as everywhere, the impact of climate changes. So I would say this is how I hope to embark you this morning, is in 3 steps, with the pumping of water, trophy hunting, and climate changes. So most of my research has been done in a beautiful ecosystem, Mwangi National Park in Zimbabwe. So it's a very large park, 15,000 square kilometers. We are used to say that it's half the size of Belgium, to give an idea to people. And it's unfenced, so animals are free to roam outside and inside. This ecosystem is part of a larger trans-frontier conservation area known as CASA. It's the largest of the world with, I think, 520,000 square kilometers, so it's huge. And because of the long-term monitoring and research that we've done there, it's now labeled as a zone atelier of the CNRS, so it's a long-term socio-ecological research site. So this is how it looks like from the sky, at least. So it's mainly a woodland and bushland savanna with some patches of grassland where you can find water holes. So we are going now to talk in detail about this water. It's limited surface water. So let's now take an historical view of this ecosystem. When this park was gathered as a game reserve in 1928, the first warden, the first person in charge of that reserve, wrote a book. And in that book, when you read the book, we realized that in the dry season, there was strictly no water available for animals. Nothing, and hardly ever any large mammal in the system in the dry season. So they decided, because it's gathered as a game reserve, to create artificial water holes. So they pumped underground water in natural depression. And they started that, and they are still doing that. Most of the pumping happened until the mid-80s, and now we've got 60 or more artificial water holes in the dry season. And you can see them on this map. You've got some rivers, but those rivers, they are dry in the dry season. So it's only those different dots that are the water holes where water is pumped. And we've shown that those water holes, obviously, it's quite obvious, attract herbivores, because this is where you will find the special, the most important special levels of distribution of herbivores. So in the early days, some of our first studies was to assess the effect of this artificial pumping on the elephant population. So this work was led by Simon Chamayejan, who is in this room and is a researcher at the CEF. We did our PhD work together 20 years ago. And so he analyzed the aerial count data for the elephant population for the park along this period. And so up to 86, the elephant population was culled. There was an active culling policy because it was already perceived too high, too abundant. And after that, it stopped, no culling anymore. And so there has been a steady increase of the elephant population. And after, it's stabilized and is fluctuating around a certain number of approximately 30,000 elephants. So now I'm going to take you to a graph that is not totally intuitive, but if you understand it, you understand the whole functioning of the elephant population in Mwangi. On the x-axis, you've got the initial elephant number. So when I say initial, I come back to that slide. We studied that period. So initially is here, and we calculated we studied this period of increase. So at the beginning of that period, this is the number of elephants that were using one water hole in 24 hours. So you could see that there was a high heterogeneity. Some water holes had no elephants, some water holes had a lot of elephants. And on the x-axis, you've got the percentage of increase per year of use of those water holes at the end of this period of increase of the population. And so what's interesting is that we realized that the water holes that were already intensively used by elephants, there's no increase. They cannot cope with more elephants. they already had their own carrying capacity of elephants there. And so by adding waters in the landscape, you just add waters that can have this carrying capacity. What's the underlying mechanism? Elephants, that's quite straightforward. They need to drink regularly, every day or every 2 days maximum, and they need to feed, to forage. When you've got water and when it's the wet season, they can forage close to water. But as the dry season progresses, they need to move further because the resources close to water have been depleted. And so they go further and further as the dry season progresses, up to a certain distance, above which they cannot go because they don't have the time to come back to a water hole. And so the population size, the population of elephants, is limited by the key resources in those dry season foraging areas defined by the distribution of waters. So you really understand how by the pumping of water, people, we are responsible of the highest density of elephants in the world, which is here in Montpellier National Park. So now that we've made that link between management practice and the functioning of the elephant population, myself, as Anna mentioned, in my PhD, I was interested in the impact of high elephant densities on the rest of the communities. So we're gonna have a look at those 3 arrows, how elephants first may impact large carnivores. It's not obvious because for most people, elephants, they are not a prey, they're not a potential prey. They're too big, they're dangerous. But because that elephant population is density dependent regulated, in dry years, you've got some natural mortality of elephants. So you've got natural mortality of elephants that provide big carcasses. And for all carnivores that are potential scavengers, it becomes a source of food. And also, in some ecosystems where elephants represent such a big biomass, some carnivores have specialized in hunting alive elephants, okay, the weak one and the small one, at the end of the dry season of drought years. But that's the case for lions. This is a picture from Wangé, and of hyenas. So what's interesting, this is now some work led by Hervé Fritz, who was my PhD supervisor, and we modeled the food webs of Wangé on the top, but of 3 very important other intensively studied ecosystems, Kruger, Ngorongoro, and Serengeti. And so in the middle, you've got the herbivores, and here you've got the elephants on the extreme right. In most ecosystems, the elephants, they are separated from the rest of the web. They are not linked to the carnivores that are on top. But in Wangé, so first it's a huge biomass because of the pumping of the water, and also it's consumed by lions and hyenas. So it becomes part of that food web, which is not the case in most of the other places. And what's interesting is that it's a pulsed resource because it's not available anytime. In the rainy season or in years when you've got a good rainfall, they are not available for carnivores. They're available from time to time, so they can be assessed as pulse resources, which are very abundant, but very occasionally and difficult to predict them. So this is something that I'm really interested in, but unfortunately I don't have yet results to show you. But we've explored that with the masterwork of Melina Sidous, whom I co-supervise with Olivier Jimenez from the CEF. And the idea is to say, okay, in periods when we've got a lot of elephant carcasses, how does that affect the active predation with the other herbivores? Does that lead to a people predation process or to a hyper predation process? So I'm not showing you results because we got very contrasted results, but just to tell you that it is something that I really want to push because I think that's important in the coming years. Second arrow, impact of elephants on the vegetation. So for those of you who've been in Africa, you sometimes see thrush trees, uprooted trees, coppice areas. So you see there's an impact on the vegetation by the elephant population. As a zone atelier, we've got this mandate to do a long-term monitoring of things. And so we set plots, vegetation plots, that we monitored regularly between 2001 and 2015. And there's been an exhaustive monitoring of all the different woody plants to see how this was changing. So, of course, it's been a big collaborative work, and Nicolas Ferry analyzed the data in the framework of his PhD. And I thank him because he did a very nice drawing that helps understand what's happening a lot. So if you look your woodland and area from the canopy, from the sky, there are no major changes. A few large trees are disappearing, but it's not major. What's getting interesting is when we get in the understory. So when we get in the understory, each graph here is showing a different plot. On the x-axis, you've got the height of the plant, and on the y-axis, you've got the crown diameter. And what's interesting, if I take this one, is that the crown diameter was higher in 2001 than it was in 2015. So we've got smaller crown diameter. Okay, just to help you picture what it means, is that in the understory, we've got smaller bushes. So of course, this should have some consequences for other herbivores because you've got potentially less food, but also an impact on the visibility in the understory. And so we've shown that the visibility is, that's quite logical, increasing as the level of elephant impact in the site is increasing. So, to come back to the beginning, are we in a case of interaction modification? Do elephants, by changing the environment and the vegetation, influences predator-prey interactions? So we took that question from the angle of the prey, and we studied the habitat selection, forage patch selection for different herbivores. And for all of them, we showed that, so at that time my hypothesis was the opposite, but we revealed that the probability of selecting a site was increasing with the level of impact by elephants. So the select sites impacted more by elephants. I thought it would be the opposite because I thought they would find less food, but well. So is it, as I said, because there's an increased visibility there, they feel safer for predators? Or is it, this has been shown in Botswana, in Chobe, that after elephant impact, some species, there is fraught with very high quality shoots, and they are called browsing lawns. So you've got higher resource quality, but that's only on the short, medium term, not on the long term. And after we took that question from the predator point of view for lions. So in the framework of a PICS and in the framework of a collaborative work between two PhD students, so still Nicolas Perry and Moen Mbisa, we visited carcasses that we know had been killed by lions because they were GPS colored, the lions. And we recorded the environmental characteristic and the vegetation characteristic. The hypothesis, so lions, they are felids and they are ambush predators. That means you've seen them in the documentaries. They need to approach the prey undetected, and vegetation is important so that they can launch an attack that has a good chance of being successful. So the hypothesis was that lions would select for prey vulnerability. So we would expect to find more kills in the intact sites, not in the modified site by elephants. And as a fun, I found the opposite. I found that lions kill more in the sites impacted by elephants. Okay, so that doesn't make sense in terms of the vulnerability story, but if I come back to the result that I've just shown you, that means then just maybe kill more where they are the prey, because the prey are in the sites impacted by elephants. So I'm at that stage here, but there's something that is missing is, okay, we've got the successful hunts with the kills, but we don't know the unsuccessful hunts. So what I would like to do in the coming years is to assess the hunting success and how elephant impact on the vegetation do influence the hunting success of lions. Because if to make a successful kill, they've tried twice, that's fine. But if they try 10 times, that's a different story. And this we don't know at the moment. So this is something that I really want to push in the coming years. And to finish with the elephant story, is that we have also studied how elephants affect the other large mammal population, essentially at waterholes. So we studied all sorts of things, well, the abundance in general, but also at what time, if it was changing the temporal niche of other species to access water, if it was affecting the time to spend in the waterhole area to drink, or fine scale aggregation. But unfortunately, but luckily for you, I don't have the time to detail all that. I'll just drink 1 minute. So now that I hope I've convinced you that the management practices has affected the elephant population, which itself in turn is impacting a lot of compartments in the system, I just want to take a few slides to also show how the distribution of water is affecting large carnivore species. because, as I said before, those water holes, they attract herbivores, so they become patches of prey, hotspots of prey in the landscape. So thanks to the strong collaboration with the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit of Oxford University, and especially with those two people, David MacDonald and Andrew Loveridge, we managed to study that because they've been coloring almost 100 GPS lions in Wangé, so we could study the use of the landscape. And so we've been able to show that lions, they select areas that are really in the vicinity of waterhole, in the 2 kilometers from a waterhole, whatever the season and whatever the sex. And we've also, and I like this map, so of course I've selected the best one, but most of them, they look very similar. You can really see that. So you've got the movement of a male lion, and the black triangle are the waterholes. And you can really see how those waterholes really structure the way the animals move in the landscape. And we've also shown that lion kills, they are mostly located close to waterhole. We've got almost 50% of the kill in the 2 kilometers from a waterhole. So we've got a hotspot of predator-prey interaction associated to those waterholes. And we've also studied, once a lion has killed the prey close to the waterhole, where does that lion go? And we've shown that that lion, in most of the cases, I don't remember exactly, but 70-something% of the cases, it goes to another waterhole, as if it's rotating its hunting effort between different waterholes. One consequence of that is that the spatial spacing of waterholes is influencing the home range size, the territory size of lions. And these trends are in areas where you've got very few waterholes that are very far apart, lions have got very large home range, and in areas where you've got waterholes that are very close together, they've got smaller home range. And this goes in support of an hypothesis that is in the literature that is referred to as the resource dispersion hypothesis. And so there's a work that I really love, and I've been very happy and lucky to contribute to, that was led by Nicolas Corbin, who is here today, and Simon Chamarijan again. And so we've shown how zebras, so we were lucky because we've got GPS called zebras too in that ecosystem, how zebras, they are close to waterholes during the day, and they go far from waterholes at night. And we've got a diurnal migration of zebras that is induced by this predation risk around waterhole. And so the more waterholes you've got in the landscape, the more it will influence those zebra movements. And this is ongoing work. So it's an ongoing work in the framework of the PhD work of Aïssa Morin. And it's a big collaborative work also with Andrew Loveridge from Oxford and Olivier Jimenez from the CEP. And we want to study how water, again, influence, because we know, okay, we know now it's influencing lions. Lions is the largest predator, but there are a lot of other predators in this carnivore community, only a few here. And so what's the impact for the other carnivores? Because carnivores, they've got a lot of interaction within the guild. And so it's very recent results, but I'm happy to share them with you. If you look at the distance to the nearest waterhole, and so we have regrouped carnivores by rank. Rank 1 is the largest carnivores, lions and hyenas, and then rank 4 is the smallest carnivores. And we can see how, depending on where you are, how far you are from a waterhole, you've got the changes in the probability of occurrence of the different carnivores. And so I hope well, we will get more results in the coming weeks now. Okay, so now let's get outside the protected area. So we are going to illustrate how what things that are happening outside the protected area do influence what's happening inside. So this is Wangé National Park. This is this polygon here. And you can see all the different land use types around Wangé. And in orange, you've got the trophy hunting section. In dark green, the communal areas where people raise the livestock and grow the crops. The main study area is this northern part of the park, which is already quite big. And since 1999, there's been a monitoring, intensive monitoring of the lion population with 900 lions that are known and monitored. For a study period, 1999-2012, we studied the mortality events that were recorded and their cause. And we identified that 80% of the mortality events were due to a human cause. Either it was trophy hunting, conflict-related mortality, whether it was legal or illegal, snaring, so it's unintentional. The snaring is set for herbivores to get some bushmeat, but carnivores get trapped in snares. And also, but this is specific to Wangé, a train accident, because the the northern border of the park, which is a straight line, is a railway. And this is how those mortality events distribute for males and for females. And for males, you see the importance of the trophy hunting. So we've decided to study the impact of trophy hunting on the male population, on the lion population. And so we've got a nice opportunity to study that because the project started in 1999 at a time where there were very high level of quotas and very high level of offtakes of lions. Based on the results from Oxford group, from the Wild Crew, they decided to stop trophy hunting for 4 years, and there was a moratorium on the trophy hunting. And the trophy hunting started again after that, but at a lower level. So we've got a nice design, and we studied, okay, now let's see what's happening in the population inside the park. So this is the number of male lion coalitions, so there's the groups of male lions. It would be the same if I would show you the number of male lions. So it's quite convincing that the moratorium had a good effect on the male population. And this, so African lions is a social species. And so the trophy hunting will have consequences not only on the male lions, but on the whole society because it's such a social species. So here, imagine you've got two territories, one red lion, male lions, and one black male lions. That black male lions roams outside the park in the trophy hunting concession, basically the dark blue area. And let's imagine it gets shot. And so then the male with the red territory, nature doesn't like to have empty spaces. So it will expand or shift a bit. At least it will go and explore. And that male can get shot again. And so you've got what is known as a vacuum effect. And so the level of trophy hunting influences the stability or instability of the lion society. And this will have a lot of consequences because when a male lion is resident of a pride, it's defending its offspring, the cubs. And if that male disappears for any reason, but it could be trophy hunting, then other males will come. And because they want the females to be able to reproduce with them very quickly, they will kill all the cubs. So this is a phenomenon known as infanticide. It's been reported in several species, but it does happen with lions. Something that is less known, and that this is really a study that I loved, and I was very happy to contribute to. It was led by Nicholas Elliott for his PhD, and he studied dispersal in lions, a very difficult subject to study. And what he showed is that the dispersal age of male lions depends whether the father was still in place, was still there, or whether there's been an arrival of a new male. So if the father is there, on average, the lion male, they disperse around 3-year-old. But if there's a new male coming, the subadult will disperse whatever its age. And it can disperse very early, not even 2-year-old. And this does have some consequences because you've got a link. So for males, look at the males, the black dots. The dispersal age is really influencing the probability of surviving dispersal for male. So if a lion male disperses too early, it will not succeed, it will not survive. If it disperses later, it's fine. So this phenomenon, we've termed it delayed infanticide, basically, because the subadults, they live too early and they will die eventually. They can't do their dispersal successfully. So you can see how the trophy hunting outside the park, because lion is a social species, is having a lot of effects of what's happening inside the park. Okay, so this is what we've studied. And now, because I've got this community perspective, what are the consequences for the other animals in the park? Because if your lion population is increasing and you've got more males, larger groups, this must have an effect. So on my to-do list, this is now several months, so I'm not very happy with me, but I really want to study the impact of that on the herbivore community. We are lucky we've got a long-term monitoring with the road counts of the herbivore in Montpellier, covering that whole period that I've shown. And so I want to study if that 3 periods of trophy hunting intensity has had some impact on the prey population. But this is to come another time. Something else that we've got interested is your carnivore species. So I've been talking a lot about lions because I've studied lions a lot, but there are other carnivores in the system. And one of the main ones is the spotted hyena. And so those two, they are really not moving independently of each other. They can't, because you've got a lot of interaction, intra-guild interactions happening. So again, those interactions are very diverse. You've all watched documentaries and seen aggressive interactions that can go up to intra-guild predation, and mainly of young ones, of cubs, but sometimes of adults. And those aggressive interaction, because there's risk of injury and death, they lead to a lot of interference mechanism. Also, for some pairs of species, there is exploitation competition, but there are also positive interaction. Don't forget the positive interaction with scavenging opportunities. And also there are more subtle things, more complicated things to study in the field, is the indirect effect that a predator can have on another one species of predator on another species of predator, via what the behavioral adjustment of a prey to one predator. Because if one prey is adjusting its behavior to be less vulnerable to predator one, it may become, through those adjustments, more vulnerable or less vulnerable for another species of predator. But this is tricky to show in the field, but in theory it works. So this work on highness has been led by Stéphanie Perriquet in the framework of a PhD. And so we were privileged because we had simultaneous colors on spotted hyenas and lions in Montpellier, and we've identified 70 encounters. So I should put brackets. It's not proper encounters. It's when they were very close by, because we've got only GPS data. So we've identified 70 times when they were very close by. And so we've studied those encounters. I will call them encounters. So you've got two graphs. Here you've got the distribution of those encounters, depending on the month of the year, and two colors, a black one if the encounters occur around the carcass, and the white one if the encounter occurs with no carcass around. And on the right graph, you've got the distribution in the landscape regarding distance to water. And so if we focus on the rainy season, on the encounters at the carcass, the black bars, most of them, they occurred in the rainy season. And they occur a bit everywhere in the landscape, not really associated to water. During those encounters, we've realized, so we've calculated the speed, which one provoked the encounter. So in most of the cases, the lions were there first, so they were the one that killed or found the prey. The hyenas arrived second, and the lions were dominant over the carcass, and the hyenas accessed the carcass only when the lions had left. This does suggest that in the wet season, hyenas benefit from lions through scavenging opportunities. In the dry season, it's a different story. In the dry season, first, the encounters where carcass are absent. Sorry, in the dry season, this is when encounters without carcass occur, and those encounters occur very close to waterhole. And so, I remind you that those waterholes, they are a hotspot of prey for all predators, so for lions, but also for hyenas. And so, again, we've studied which predator species provoke the encounter and which one left quickly after the encounter. And unexpectedly, we realized that in many cases, it's the hyenas that provoke the encounter. And in many cases, the lions avoided the hyenas, well, spatially at least, and left the area very quickly. So this does suggest more interference competition in the dry season between those two species. So after whether it is direct interaction because hyenas, they actively chase the lions from the hunting grounds that are waterhole area, that's a possibility. Or is it that lions, once hyenas are around, they leave the area because prey will have missed so many behavioral adjustments that they will be more difficult to catch for them. So those two things are to investigate in the future. But for sure, we've got contrasted type of interaction, whether it's the rainy season or the dry season. And I attract your attention here because sometimes we put one arrow between two species, but that arrow may have several reality depending on the time you consider or other things. And so we went one step further. So I come back to this graph. This is the lion population, the increase in the lion population. But we were lucky because we got information on the diet of hyenas in that period when the lion population was low, and in that period when the lion population was at a high level. And so we compared the composition of hyena diets between those two periods. And so what we've shown is that we've had an increase of the use of very large prey, elephants and giraffe. So they consume more elephants and giraffe in the second period when the lion population is above. And they consume less of medium-sized prey. So again, the mechanism, that's again a question. Is it because there are increased opportunities for scavenging by hyenas because lions, they live in larger groups and you've got more males. So they are more likely to kill very large prey than if they are in small groups and with no male. At the beginning of the study, lion groups were smaller because you've got less subadults, less cubs surviving. So it might be more difficult for them to catch a lion at the beginning of our study period than nowadays when the groups are larger and with male present. Or is it an increased risk of kleptoparasitism? Again, because the lion groups are larger. If you know you are hyena and you are going to kill something and the lions arrive, no chance, because it's the balance between the group size that matters during an encounter. And thank you for still being with me. I'm a bit long and I will just finish, that will be quick, because that's very recent work and I haven't done much on that, the impacts of climate changes on this system. So, as you've seen, I've always been interested by predator-prey interaction. And when you put environmental condition into the story, the traditional way people think is that climate, so an environmental condition, influences vegetation. And vegetation, of course, it's food for herbivores, and it determines the body condition. And based on that, it will influence their capacity to reproduce and to survive, so prey abundance. In all modeling exercises, it's been the common route to think. But for everyone who has worked in the field, we know that prey abundance is important, but what is important is prey vulnerability. Because sometimes you've got a lot of prey, but they are not vulnerable to the predator. And prey vulnerability can be influenced by two paths, either by the prey body condition, okay, a weaker prey is easier to catch, or by the vegetation. So I don't know if you see well on this picture, but here you've got a lion in the tall grass, and here short grass. So you can see how the vegetation will affect how the prey feels depending on the predation risk. And so I've mentioned the hunting mode of lions. They are ambush predators, so they need the environment to be able to hide themselves and approach a prey undetected as much as possible. Cursorial predators, so it's the case for most canids and hynid species. For them, they can really run after their prey and for quite a while and until the prey is exhausted. So it's very different techniques to hunt. And for them, it's more the importance of the prey body condition that should matter in theory. And so we could expect that for ambush predators such as the lion, it's this path that matters the most, whereas for hyenas, it's the other path that matters the most. And so these are things that we are exploring at the moment. So we've just done that through a modeling approach with Aïssa Morin and Simon Chamaija. And we've shown, well, that's in that theoretical approach, that if you have a high amount of rainfall, the lion population, they thrive better than the hyena population, which makes sense because if you've got a lot of rainfall, you've got a dense vegetation and high grass. And in arid system, you would expect hyenas to thrive better than lions because in arid system, the prey are in worse body condition. And so this is now what is going to take me busy in the coming years. I've been lucky enough to be funded by the INR after a lot of trials to do an empirical approach of that question. And so again, it's in collaboration with researchers at the CEF. And so we want to be able to quantify this hunting success that I mentioned, to try to identify the unsuccessful hunts, because we know the successful hunts, and so that we can calculate the hunting success and test this hypothesis. We expect the hunting success of the African lion to decrease as the dry season progresses, and of hyenas the opposite. And this would help understanding the future of those populations in the Southern Africa, where the prediction for an aridification of all the systems. So I hope I've convinced that what matters is the arrows. You must be fed up of seeing arrows in my talk, but I think it's really important to really understand all the different links between the species. And ultimately, I would love to go towards the formalization of this ecological network because I've got the feeling that all the different pieces of work that I've done, they are the pieces of a big puzzle that we can try to assemble. We've had examples of things we've studied with trophic and non-trophic interaction, negative but also positive interactions, direct interaction, and interaction modification, and also the spatio-temporal dynamics, the things that I was telling with the hyenas. Sometimes there might be positive interaction, other times negative. It's not fixed. And I thank you very much to the one online and the one in the room for listening to me. And, I've been a little bit long, sorry.
fascinating. So I think that nobody will complain. So yeah, I think with the questions from the room, speak up a little loud. The microphone is on the table, so please.
Sorry. Now you persuaded us about the importance of all these arrows. You made this think. What about all the other arrows, the other predators, the other herbivores? Because then it kind of feels like you can't understand anything when you just look at 1 hour at a time, but you still can manage to find a signal. So what about the others?
What about the others? But I think we start little and we grow bigger step after step. So as I say, we started studying lion and zebras, and then say, okay, what about the other herbivores? And after we include the hyenas, and there are other carnivores than hyenas. So it's really building slowly and larger. And sometimes you realize that one thing that you study doesn't impact much what you assessed before, but sometimes it brings you some light what you study later on what you find before. So I don't. It's not really an answer to your question, but the way we conceive it is that I would love to study everything at the same time, but even though I wouldn't know how to do it really. But yeah, so, and we've just focused on large mammals, and I know there are obviously other actors in the systems, but for other people.
I had a question on the part about the elephants and the canopy. I mean, I was wondering, is it possible? I mean, okay, are you sure that it's the elephants that are the cause of this, but that the other herbivores are coming, or is it just that there's just happens to be food there that's good for both the elephants and the other herbivores, and that's why the you see what I mean? The cause would be that
how can we be sure that it's elephant impact?
Yes, exactly, and not just because this high quality food there brings both elephants, but also these other smaller herbivores. Then the cause would just be that the food is better there.
Okay. So I think I will try to answer in several steps. In the field, when we were doing this exhaustive monitoring of the plants, you can really see when it's, because we record if it's foraged by elephants, you can really see when you've got a trunk that is broken. There's no doubt that it's an elephant compared to another herbivores. Sometimes for the browsing, it's more tricky, but it's really a typical way of, I don't know in English the term, of chewing the branches, and we can really see. I would say for me, what's more potential confounding effects is that we know there's a big effect of fire and frost on vegetation. So we haven't had major fire in the plots that we've monitored, so I don't think fire is a problem, but frost is known sometimes to impact the mortality, so maybe not of the big trees, but of the smaller plants, and we don't have a record of those black frost that we call in the system. I don't know if I've answered you.
Yeah, I mean, I was not saying that it's not the elephants that are reducing the size of the bush. I was just saying that perhaps the reason why the other herbivores are still coming is because this bush were good food for them, just as it was good food
for the elephants.
For the elephants.
Okay. Yes, that's true. That's true. I haven't shown because in each foraging patch of the herbivores we were writing the species that were present. So not the species on which the herbivore was feeding, but the species that were present. So this is something that I think was controlled for when we did the analysis.
Yeah.
But I think what we lack in that ecosystem is someone that would really focus on the fine-scale foraging behavior of the other herbivores. Because we often look at it as, okay, they are there, they use these sites. But what do they forage on? No one so far has studied that.
Okay.
Yes?
When you say that the lions move between watering holes, are they the only lions in that area, or are there other prides? Why do they do this? Is this so the prey doesn't learn, or is it?
So, in one area, basically you've got it's the territory of a pride, and then your male coalition, they secure the prides that have secured the landscape where they can find their food. So obviously you've got several lions, but most of the time in one area of the landscape, the common rule is that you've got those resident lions. But after you've got the nomadic lions, the young lions that disperse and look for a territory, so you can have the wandering lions. But there was something else in your question than that.
So why do they move between watering holes?
Between waters.
Is this so the prey doesn't learn how to escape them? Or?
So I think they move between waters for two reasons, but there might be several others. The two that I think of, when they kill, it was the graph when I showed, when they kill at a water, they go to a different water. My interpretation of that is that because when they've made a kill, the other herbivores, they know they're there because there's some noise, and after they feed, and then you've got the vultures, so they know there's been a kill, they know there's a carnivore, they know that they might have seen, I heard the chase, the kill. And so the herbivores, they know the lions are there, so either they move somewhere else, or they are still there, but they've made a lot of behavioral adjustment that they are very aware that the lion is there, maybe they're watching, and so the lion knows, okay, here, I will not have my surprise effect. So I need to go somewhere else, in another hunting ground, in another place where I can try. So I think this is what is pushing the lions to not stay at one water, because once the herbivores are aware that the lion is around, end of the story for the lion. Not in our ecosystem, but in other ecosystems, they've watched and quantified the events when lions were successful. And they say that if a lion, when he starts the run, the chase to hunt, lives with a few seconds after the prey, so if the prey starts, see the lions and starts running, end of the game, the lions will never catch the prey. They can be very quick, but they have herbivores too, and on a short distance. So they really need this to be undetected at the beginning. And then so they rotate between the different rotors for also, I think, territorial marking, because I think those waters are very important for the carnivores, and I'm convinced you of that. And so they really need to secure those hunting grounds and those prey-rich area in the system. And so they move between the waters, I think also to roar, to mark the territory with the urine and everything, to also signal to the other males when they are male, or even to the other lioness if you are a female, that, okay, that's my territory, these are my water holes.
I will have a question to work too, actually, if I may. First, so last week we had a presentation beyond the impact on vegetation, on what herbivores were visiting a given place. So the first question is, how have water holes changed the vegetation that is available for herbivores, and how that modifies then what herbivores are visiting compared to where there were water holes? And then the more general one is, would all this research exist without the water holes? So is this something that is human created? And is this a positive, something that you can say is a positive human intervention?
Okay, so the first one. Yes, the water hole, the creation of a water hole is affecting the vegetation. Because if you create a water hole somewhere, and this water is going to be used by elephants, but by all other herbivores, so you've got foraging happening and also trampling. So with the years, after the time, the vegetation around the water holes is being heavily impacted, and there's this biosphere effect. So you've got more and more, you see a bare soil created around the water holes because of the high intensity of use around the water holes. So after Simon, who is here, studied the disappearance of the trees depending on the distance to the water, and it's shown that it's only up to 1 kilometer after there's no effect. So there's an effect, I would say, a very strong effect in the first few 100 meters. You've got bare soil, and you can really see the effect of the water hole on the structure of the vegetation. So not on the composition, we mainly studied the structure, up to 1 kilometer, with a change in the number of trees and everything. Does that answer your first question? And so your second question is a tricky one. So obviously the pumping has modified the system. If you would leave the system natural with no water, there would not be all these large mammals in that ecosystem. So on the one side, it's good because you've got more animals there, but I'm sure you've got also impacts on the smaller animals that I'm not studying, insect, birds, and everything. So this is something that we need to add to have a complete picture of the things. but at the same time, it's not natural. So there are two things that I would like to say. The way if you look at the map of the distribution of the waterholes, they've mainly pumped in the northern, in the first 1/3 of the north of the park. This is where most waterholes are. And in the south of the park, it's what they call more a wilderness area, and they try to leave it as intact as possible. So after the years, with what we've seen, I would say that myself, I tend to think that it's a good situation because you've got one part of the park where you've got, well, this artificial system based on the water, but where you've got high densities of large mammals, and it's important for some large mammals, and in particular for the African elephants, because the African elephant population is declining in many ecosystems. So I think it's the core of the remaining range is in that area of the Southern Africa. And so maybe that's an important goal as people to conserve an elephant. And that's it. But I think we could debate a lot on that because it's philosophical, in fact, and people might not have the same view and disagree. And also the main question is how sustainable is that on the long term? Because so they pump underground water, and there have been some studies to know, okay, is it a water that is renewed every year, or is it fossil water? So there are often a big question mark there.
So, sorry. A small question about waterhole and elephant. You the increase in elephant number you observe in after the waterhole period is due to newborn elephant or a long migration from Okavango, for example, because in Okavango there is large population of elephants.
It's a bit of both. It's the natural production, and it's been due to immigration, a lot of immigration of elephants from other places.
Yeah, that's another factor.
Yeah. And of course, the elephants that are in Mwangé with GPS collars, our research group has shown that you find them in Botswana from time to time. So it's really a shared range.
We have a question there from this Nelly and Yoni. So if you want to ask your question aloud, please.
Yes. Good day.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh, yes. I just wanted to say thank you for a wonderful presentation. I would like to know, like, over the years, what would you say was the major challenge that you encountered? Yeah, that was just my question. Thank you.
What's the main challenge?
Working as a researcher at the national park is, yeah, just to conclude it. But yeah, the major challenge, so that us aspiring researchers can, pick up something and be able to learn from your study. Yeah, what was the major challenge?
So I'm not sure if I will answer in the direction that you want me to answer. It's just, for me, the main challenge is that, as you've seen, this knowledge has been built through the years, through a lot of years. And the challenge is to keep research happening there in terms of finding the funding for this long-term research. So sometimes you are lucky, a big grant, but sometimes you've got years you've got nothing and you still want to do things. So I think it's securing that research on the long term in terms of the logistics, and also in terms of sometimes the research permits that we have problems from time to time. But yeah, I think we learn a lot from the long term, and it's very important to build on the existing knowledge now in that side. And so I think my main challenge, and sometimes my deception for me, has been that sometimes it's been difficult to continue, either for funding problems or sometimes for authorization. But I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think so. We can thank again Marion for
Thank you to you.
Presentation. For the seminar series, we will meet again on the 19th for the next seminar, and then we will launch today the new call for proposals for presentations that will start in January. So check your emails today and then propose presenters, male and female, local and visitors, and we will then be very happy to host all of them from January on. Thank you very much.